Welcome to the Bicurian podcast, where we explore and embrace the seeming contradictions of life. What actually is Bicurian, you ask?
Well, you may not necessarily have a mental concept of Bicurian, partially maybe because it's a made-up word. You embody it. What's happening right now in terms of the divisions between us is a focus on that which is different.
And lack of understanding and empathy for people's beliefs is no longer an excuse.
And it is in the differences we carry in ourselves that we find the Bicurian moment.
When you really dig into something, you're going to see some depth to it. It's not just a race thing. It's not just a conservation thing.
It's letting go of the or to make room for the and. We embrace all of you. Welcome to the Bicurian.
Hi, I'm Aisla.
And I'm Eric. And on this week's show, we decided to take a left turn. That is a travel reference.
Or north. We went north.
We went north. And we have a special guest. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, I am Teresa Christine. I am a freelance travel writer, and I am based in Los Angeles, California, but I spend quite a lot of time on the road as well.
That seems fitting. I think if you're going to be a travel writer, doing that probably from the comfort of your own home is harder.
I thought you were going to say if you're going to be a traveler, you should always be leaving LA.
It's true.
It's true, yeah. I do joke with people often because, I do spend a certain amount of time writing and pitching and just kind of in my home office based in Los Angeles. So I tell people that I am either traveling or I'm a recluse, like at home with my cat.
So I actually I have a relevant experience of that because I traveled for a living for work for many years. I was everything from a product specialist to a national sales manager and all of that. And I was on the road every week or every other week. And I would come home and people were like, do you want to go do this thing? I'm like, no, I would like to not go and do a thing.
Yeah. So, lots of folks feel like traveling for a living has to be glamorous and exotic and in any other superlative word. What would you say to somebody who came up to you with massive amounts of admiration and enthusiasm about maybe the realities of being a travel writer?
Definitely. I always talk to people and tell them how lucky I am to have the job that I have. Because I do consider myself really lucky. But I think it's much more exhausting than people realize because typically, especially Americans, we're taking vacation for like a week at a time, maybe 2 weeks. And it's just jam-packed relaxation or sightseeing or whatever. And then you go back to normal life. And it is kind of exhausting to constantly be on the road or be out for 5 days, back at home for 5 days, and then out again. So it's definitely more exhausting than I think people realize. So while I enjoy it a lot, I spend a lot of nights at home, not socializing and just kind of wanting to go to bed early. And I'm not complaining. Again, very lucky, but yeah, that's the reality.
There's ups and downs. I like I said, from my experience, I totally know what you're talking about.
Yeah, everything has a variety packed in it. I know from when I first reached out to you, one of the things that I thought would be interesting to hear about is how do you balance that being both traveling and going lots of places and in a certain way uprooted with also having some form of landing pad or roots in a community. Like what does that look like for someone whose job literally is to go away?
It's really challenging. Being in Los Angeles is an interesting place to be to begin with because it's really hard to socialize and meet people and make friends here. I think once you get past 25, it's difficult. But especially in Los Angeles where people are just driving around everywhere and they're kind of in their own little zone, it's definitely hard to make friends. And so even before I started really pursuing this career, I had 2 solid friends in Los Angeles. And so, it's funny, I just recently had a college friend move out here to Los Angeles, and we've only been able to meet up once because he'll message me and say, do you want to meet up next week? I'm out of town. Can you do this day instead? And he's got something. So it's just, it makes it a lot more precious with your time at home. And I'm still struggling to find that balance of being away. I think last year I was away for about a third of the year. And then, having a life at home, and I'm married, I have a husband here, and, I've had that feeling before where I feel a little bit like I'm missing out on a life at home with him. So we have kind of an open agreement where if it ever gets to be too much on his end and he feels like I'm not around, we need to talk about it because we don't want it to, hurt our relationship. So it's a lot of work.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. I was going to say, is there at least a little bit of a silver lining? Does he get to go with you once in a while?
Sometimes we'll tack on time at the beginning or end of trips. So, and then occasionally if I'm doing a media stay at a hotel that's nearby and he's able to join. So that's very nice when he gets to reap the benefits of what it is that I do. I really, really enjoy getting to share that with him.
Yeah, I can imagine.
That'd be awesome.
Yeah, we're not everything is organized and completely set in stone yet, but it looks like we're going to Hawaii in April, which has been kind of a goal for us for the past year and a half, as we wanted to go there. And I have a trip taking me out there, so I decided I'll just use some points and take him out there and spend a few days before the official work trip with him.
That's awesome. Yeah, see, it can work out sometimes. So I'm curious, what does a work trip look like? What do you have a structure to it? Does it depend on the trip, or do you have certain things that are always done and certain things that are never done?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think where people don't 100% understand what goes into everything. Occasionally I will travel on my own, and, I will be fronting all of the money and the funds for the flights and the hotels and everything. More often than not, I'm doing what are called press trips or media tours. And so these are organized by a PR company. The PR company has clients, which are typically destinations or the hotels themselves. And the hotels or the destinations say, we want to go ahead and pay for a certain amount of journalists to come out and experience this destination. And so they basically line up everything for us. Because that's how it works, it's very often that they want to kind of jam-pack the schedule. So we get to do really cool activities, and sometimes they're very nice activities, like doing a spa treatment at the hotel spa. But after the spa, then it's time to go and hit the other things in the schedule. I think the hardest trip that I ever went on, I woke up and had to be in the lobby by 7 a.m. so that we could go get breakfast. And then we met up with a bunch of different artists in downtown Nashville. We did lunch and all of these other activities, and we got back to the hotel by 11 p.m.
That's a long day.
It's very long. And you want to, you are there and wanting to experience all these things, because the more things that I experience, the more I have to write about later. So it's a good thing, but it's so exhausting, and you're getting to have the experiences, but I'm also sitting there on my phone taking notes the whole time and making sure I get all the photos that I need for a magazine. So it's not a vacation. I don't go on vacation professionally like some people think.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be a misnomer around that. And now you said we a lot in there. You're referring to, do you do these with groups of other writers a lot, or is it ever solo, or?
I've done a couple of solo media trips. Personally, I like doing a group trip. They usually include 3 to 5 other journalists. And I like being around people. I'm an extroverted person. And so while I enjoy at the end of the day to relax in my hotel room, I enjoy interacting with other people throughout the day. And I find the group ones more enjoyable. And it's cool to get to meet the other journalists. I've met people who work on Condé Nast Traveler, and Matador Network. So, just cool websites and magazines that I respect. And then I've even gotten work from that, because sometimes editors will be on those trips and they'll say, "You're really cool. Like, I want you to write for us." And it's worked out in that way.
Yeah, that sounds really great. So I know I have only knowingly read one of your articles. And that was the one about you taking your mom to Burning Man. You want to talk a little bit about that?
That was such a fun article to write, because typically I don't get to write from my own very deeply personal experiences. It's more often I'm writing a guide about a city, and it has to be something that a wide variety of people can relate to. And this particular article you're talking about it was published on HuffPost Personal. And so they're very personal accounts. And it was so fun to get to write about that experience. And it was like writing a diary entry, essentially, which they're fun to write, but those are really hard to sell for magazines. And so I was really fortunate to get to write for them. And the editor, Sahaj Kohli, was fantastic. She took the piece that I submitted initially and gave me a couple of notes and edits, and it just improved it tenfold. And it's a piece I'm really particularly proud of, and I know was very meaningful to my mom as well.
I really enjoyed it. I shared it with a lot of people.
And we should actually,
you.
well, I was going to say, we should state for our listeners that we actually met you at Burning Man this last trip that we were on. And we've actually had several guests from that experience, and we've been pretty open about the fun we had at Burning Man and the connections that we made. And so, I forgot to mention at the beginning where we actually met you.
Well, we didn't go to Burning Man for the purpose of finding people for the podcast. It is, however, a place where there's so many creative, interesting people doing things that it worked out that way.
Yeah, you're not out there scouting people.
No, I didn't go scout. I mean, next time, it's okay to go with like an agenda, right?
Maybe, but I feel like if we looked for it, we would have found less. So
yeah, probably.
It's true. If you go out there looking for something in particular, it's either going to evade you, or I think if you're looking for something negative, it's all you're going to see.
Yeah. No. So, what is your weirdest travel experience?
Ooh, all right. Weirdest travel experience. I do have to think about that one for a little bit. Weirdest. Do you mean like most unique? Or
whichever one sticks out in your head is that was something that happened.
Ooh, okay. That was something that happened.
That is such a descriptive phrase that isn't really descriptive.
It's not, and it could be positive or negative.
Yeah.
I love how open-ended that is.
Yeah. One thing that sticks out to me, I think one thing that I still remember, it's not a bad experience. It was just a really kind of sobering and nice experience. I was in Poland, in Krakow, and my great-grandfather is from a small town that's maybe like an hour to an hour and a half bus ride south of there. So pretty close to the border of Slovakia in the Tatra Mountains. And I had decided I was going to go and just go and visit the little town that he was from. So it was such an exhausting, stressful day, because outside of Krakow and probably the major cities in Poland, English isn't really as widely spoken. So, I was communicating with hand gestures and charades, and had to figure out the bus to take down to this little tiny town. And then these buses in some places such as South America and in really rural areas aren't really buses. They're kind of those big white vans that you can fit 18 people into. So it's more like one of those vans, and the guy in the front, he's just smoking this big cigar, and you just hand him coins. It's very unofficial. No, he doesn't speak any English. I don't speak any Polish. And I get there, and it's this teensy tiny town where my great-grandfather is from. It's called Minyovi. And it was a gloomy, rainy day. And it's an odd thing, but all I wanted to do was just go and walk through the graveyard there. So I went through the town really briefly. There was a church and like a corner store, and that was about it. It's pretty residential. And then otherwise, I just walked through the graveyard and like looked to see if I could find our family name. And I didn't. Unfortunately, I didn't have a bunch of time because I'd spent so much time stressing out about how to get there. But it was just one of those weird, bizarre experiences that doesn't sound like a particularly exciting day, but it was incredibly exhausting because I was constantly paying attention to where am I going and how am I getting there and who's around me. But then also just on a deeper level, it was really cool to be in the place where like my family was from, and to get to experience that was just really special. And to be alone too, I was totally by myself.
Yeah, it sounds like it'd be a kind of a deeply personal experience and kind of an interesting
Yeah.
adventure. I that has been my experience. A lot of times I've traveled to different foreign countries where English is not the native language, and you do find yourself, not too many steps off the beaten path and not being in a place where it's easy to communicate or whatever. Fortunately, I've tended to do that in Germany, where I speak enough German to get by, but that's I've been lucky in that regard. Is that common? Or I'd imagine if you're spending a lot of time at resorts, English is pretty common, I'm sure.
English is very common in the resorts. For me, I don't, obviously, I would never slight anybody for not knowing English if I'm in another country.
Oh, I
There are
take it.
people, though,
Yeah, I take it personally. Like, I should know the basics of how to get by here. This is on me. I'm in your home.
yeah. And like, I always make a point to learn the basics, like hello, thank you, please, where is the bathroom or something like
I
that.
think that's the basics right there.
Yeah,
Maybe the word
it's all you need.
for food, like starving. Starving. Point to yourself.
Yeah. Like even in a place like Iceland, where everybody speaks English, I always ask in advance if they speak it, because I think it's kind of rude for people to just assume that they're going to know English. We are very lucky in a way to have that convenience, but not everyone does.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. I really find that to be a politeness. I learned in several different languages, but primarily like German being a language that I spoke fluently at some point in the past. Aisel actually speaks it too.
Oh,
But when I first got there, and still to this day, like if I get in a taxi, first thing I ask, sprechen Sie English? And the answer is almost always yes. But it kind of sets it up that it's like, hey, I bothered to at least speak enough German to you that that I'm not being what I like to call an ugly American about it.
yeah. And there are some places where they're just delighted that you even try to do it. Like, I was fortunate enough to go to China last year and stayed at an Airbnb with this lovely woman who we communicated. She had this app on her phone, so we communicated through this app, and she would speak her Mandarin into it, and then it would translate in real time to English to me. But when we first met each other, I said ni hao, and then she started rattling off some Mandarin, thinking that I understood what she was saying. And I was like, oh no, I just know ni hao, and that's it.
Right.
Yeah, something. So I would love to, and this, you're going to love this, delve into something you've been working on.
Yes. I got kind of tired of Instagram recently because I don't know how active you are or any of your listeners are on social media, but there is just this wave of influencers on social media kind of posting these typical travel photos where it's the girl, she's, staring away from the camera and looking at this beautiful sunset. And there's a really popular one that couples will take where the guy is holding the girl's hand, and it's a photo of like his hand reaching out and her in the foreground and stuff. and Instagram is just inherently a photo heavy medium. So I got a little tired of just everybody wanting these like perfect photos and not caring at all about what the caption was, or caring so much that I feel like I see so many puns and plays on words. I'm not sure about that one.
Yes.
Yes, one of those. Just seeing so many of those cutesy little captions, and I was like, where's the meat of the story here? Like, where is the real experience that this person had in this destination? And I don't feel like I was getting it on any medium, on any social media platform. So I went ahead and I just started a newsletter recently called Delve. And it's honestly about as close to the Huffington Post article as I can possibly get. It's just kind of my unedited experiences, my photos that, I'm not going to be sharing anywhere else. So things like that. I was recently in Los Cabos actually, and did a really cool like bath experience, like a steam bath experience, and music was a big part of it. I actually got an audio clip of this woman singing a song, and so that's something that I'm going to be sending out in the newsletter. Just these little bits of travel and experiences that I think are really the most meaningful, and unfortunately I don't feel like necessarily always fit into a magazine or into a publication. So kind of my own way of getting to publish what I want and sharing it with people who are really excited to hear it.
So how do I get on that list?
I will share the link with you. It's a little link, like a bit.ly. I guess that's how you pronounce it, a bit.ly.
And we'll post it in the show notes so people find it easily.
Yeah. So it's bit.ly/let's delve.
I can remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like that kind of personal experience. I think if I wanted to see what people's experience of travel was, it's not necessarily the staged selfies and things like that. More of the actual, like, tell me what this experience was and how it felt, or what was cool about it. And not necessarily. Yeah, you're right. We live in we still live in the 140 character world that Twitter created, and it's like it's a picture and a brief story that's usually not even remotely about like what the actual thing going on is.
Yeah, and it's listicles, it's city guides, and top 10s of places to eat. And I think that can be really valuable information, especially when you're planning a trip. But some people, I think, just want to travel very briefly as entertainment, as like they would read a book. They want to be transported somewhere for 20 minutes. And so that's what I want to try and do with the newsletter.
That's really great. Thank you.
So one other thing that we were talking about beforehand, what do you feel like, how do people treat you, being from the US right now? Like, have you had any kind of interesting experiences around that? I have a story. In 2016, I was in Europe. We were in Germany and Italy, and we were told by three different waiters at the three different restaurants. We were asked, actually, are you voting for Trump? I think they had a vested interest in that because they could tell we were American. And we didn't get asked as much a year later in 2017 when we were back in some of the same places. And I could just tell that, like, in general, there was a different vibe towards Americans. Like, it wasn't bad. They were happy. They weren't assuming that we were Trump voters or whatever, but it was a strange feeling.
I actually, honestly, I've had a very similar experience to you. I was traveling in Europe in 2016, and it was a constant point of discussion, and not in a hostile way.
No, yeah.
But just people asking, what do you think about him? What do you think about Trump? And then when I was back in Europe the following year, it really wasn't a point of discussion as much anymore. I think one thing I realized at one point, I was in Italy as well, and this was actually on my honeymoon. I was in Italy, driving around with my husband, and we had like a driver in this beautiful area, and he was talking to us, and he was like, "Yeah, I think Trump is a really good president, and we are not Trump supporters and fairly liberal people. So we were a little like, what do you mean? Tell us more. And he said, I don't think he necessarily says things in the best way all the time, but I think he's a good businessman. And we had to explain to him, well, actually, he's not that great of a businessman. He's gone through periods of, I think, bankruptcy almost. And, he's not as good as a businessman as I think people truly believe. And it just made me realize that people outside of the US have their own issues with their own government and policies and everything, that while it's the forefront of our mind, I think it's really not as important to them, and they only get so much. Like it's very filtered outside of us, and it's filtered here too.
I think that's exactly it. That we have this impression sometimes that what's big in our news is big in everyone else's news, and in a lot of ways, like I've had the opposite view of that, and I've been surprised to go to foreign countries and see that they're leading with stories about what's going on in the U.S. on their local news. That actually surprised me. But yeah, for the most part, yeah, they've got their own things, and their country's politics or news of the day doesn't necessarily revolve around us. I was just kind of surprised that many people took that much of an interest in our election at that time.
It was crazy. Everyone that I met, and I was kind of couch surfing through a couple different places, and it was a topic of discussion with everybody. So I totally hear you there. But as far as people treating me in any kind of negative way, that's never happened, which I really appreciate. There's this thing that frequent travelers will sometimes do where they'll put a Canadian flag on their backpack or something.
Yeah. I've heard about that.
Yeah, I really don't feel like we should be doing that. I feel like we should be acting as ambassadors when we are in another country and try and be the best version and not necessarily prove to people, but show people that we are kind and compassionate, and that this one person who seems to represent our country actually really doesn't represent all of us. And, that's how I feel.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think you're right. We are ambassadors, and we might be one in 50 Americans they see that day, or we might be the one they see that month. So, be good.
Yeah.
That's good advice. Well, thank you so much, Teresa. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, and we'll be sharing your links in the show notes. Is there anything you wanted to kind of cover? Anything else people should check out?
So this is exciting. I am currently working on a TV show.
Wow.
It's still very much in the works. We don't have an official even name for it yet, so I can't really direct people to anything. But I will say that it is heavily female focused. So if anyone out there knows of rad females around the world doing cool stuff, I would love if someone reached out to me, just because I'm always curious. Like I love talking to amazing women and just learning more about what they do and what their life is like. So that would be so cool to be connected with other people. So just reach out. I'm on Twitter more than anything at It's Me, Teresa C.
And I'll post a link to that so that folks can pass that on.
Yeah, and we'll be happy to cross promote that when it's getting launched and after the show and everything, for sure. So
Cool.
Yeah, that'll be great.
well, thank you for your time tonight, and looking forward to talking to you again soon.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Bicurian Moment. So
I was going to go first, and then I paused. That was effective.
that's
My Bicurian moment today is I was reflecting on movie ratings like you do. And so several years ago, I watched a documentary called This Movie Is Not Yet Rated. And it was talking about the movie rating system and the sort of weirdness behind it, which is that there isn't really like a set of criteria for movie ratings, such as a G movie. Like there's that box, right, where it says like, not much violence or whatever. But that's not actually defined in any kind of concrete fashion.
And I feel like it's shifted over the years a lot.
Oh, it really has. Like,
PG-13 these days used to be R.
Well, and legitimately, like I recall being, I don't know, you remember the days of those stores you could go to where they would have physical copies of movies.
Yeah.
And I remember being in one of those and looking at a movie that had once been rated R, and they'd actually re-rated it to PG.
Interesting.
And so it kind of gave me some pause as to thinking about, well, why am I letting other people decide what the, I don't know, character content of this media is when they're willing to shift it? It's not so much that they're, and I know it's not a quality thing, right? It's supposed to be a guide for parents, essentially. However, even parents aren't particularly satisfied with it. There's at least one or two alternate forms of rating systems where parents will go in and do what I was saying, where they have like concrete criteria, and parents will say, okay, this movie, while rated PG, actually, when you use these concrete criteria that we've all agreed on, is actually PG-13.
Yeah.
And so, so for me, it was one of those moments when I saw that in the video rental store that I realized letting somebody else determine for me what things were likely to be off-putting or unsettling was probably not how I wanted to go with it. That I was not going to necessarily use that as a guide. Other than that, I have a high sensitivity to violence and cruelty, and I know that R-rated movies that are action movies might have more graphic instances of that. But to be honest, television depictions of violence and cruelty have sometimes, and I'm not talking now like with the HBO shows where no holds are barred at all.
Yeah.
There's like normal network television shows have on occasion been violent or cruel in a way that causes me to be very upset.
Well, and that's been a major shift. FCC has some very firm guidelines for television broadcast if it's over the air about what can be said and what can be shown. So swear words have to be edited out on live broadcast. And what I think a few people have never realized, I've just talked to people and they don't realize that if it comes in over the cable line, it's not actually held to those standards.
Well, I realize that.
And so saying certain words that are now prevalent on late night TV on a lot of stations was always allowed. They've just decided to do it. Previously, they had held themselves to a standard of not doing that. And I think they tested it and it didn't stop people from watching shows. Like, they're going off of ratings. That's what they want. So, it's just become more prevalent now. And then you have things like HBO that set this standard of, action oriented, no holds barred, violent, gory, sexual situations, lots of swearing. And that's what people got used to. And the networks seem to say, okay, here's the deal. We want to have that viewership too. So you had things like, I think the most significant one was probably AMC's Walking Dead when that came on TV. It had the TVMA, thing, but for a cable TV station that wasn't a premium cable TV station, it was probably not what a lot of people would have expected.
Yeah. Well, and for me, the sort of, the Bicurianness of it is that specifically with the movie rating system, we have a system that ostensibly exists to provide some form of guidance around making choices. And it is so nebulous as to what the criteria are that it is not necessarily particularly useful to anybody.
Yeah. They've tried to change it. It's an interesting thing, but I think it does, for me, as far as the way I've looked at it, it's a personal responsibility thing to kind of look into things. Like if you have an issue with something, you might ask a friend if they've seen it or read some reviews online. Luckily, we have ways of finding out what your experience might be if you're intrigued to see something but not sure that you can handle what it's going to be.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that, and I find that to be an interesting, setup that here we're going to offer this service, utility tool, and yet we're not going to necessarily make it super functional.
Yeah.
I mean, so it happens a lot, so it's fine. And that was my moment. That was my thought.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's something to think about. There are tools to use, but in the end, I think it comes down to we are responsible for our own experiences.
Agreed.
My Bicurian moment is actually not far off because it has to do with kind of things that are regulated by our government, and things like the ratings on movies are, but specifically FDA. And you'll notice I didn't say the FDA because I worked in a field where I was on a grant from FDA to produce materials around food safety and worked very hand in hand with a couple of key FDA people in that division.
And you can't say the FDA?
No, it's actually not the proper way to say it.
Is it like saying the Ukraine? Because I will tell you, I have a friend who lived in Ukraine. And if you say the Ukraine, oh no.
Yeah. So I'm going to assume it's that. But yeah, no, technically it's not the FDA, it's FDA.
And it's Ukraine. I'm going to add that educational moment in.
And there you go. But specifically around something that happened a few weeks ago where essentially FDA approved a ketamine related drug for therapy around depression.
The horse tranquilizer?
Yes. And also the party drug. So they have a lot of like really strict guidelines.
That's a Bicurian drug right there.
Yeah.
Horse tranquilizer and party drug. It's like the new Shimmer from SNL.
Well, and so it's interesting because we, a few weeks before that, even we had been having a discussion with a molecular biologist that we ran into about some of the chemical properties of ketamine and how it is not easily separated. It has a left-hand molecule and a right-hand molecule, and it's not easily separated. If it was, the one particular molecule would be really useful for humans, but it's so expensive and cost prohibitive to do it. That's why it hasn't been on. But in this case, they've actually had been doing testing and approved it for the treatment of depression, which is kind of groundbreaking in a lot of ways that, they're looking at things like that, out of left field. That does feel like a positive thing.
Yeah.
But the whole thing actually also got me thinking that ultimately FDA has also just kind of been a disaster. You compare the food additives that we allow in the United States, and we can't sell a lot of our food into other countries, especially any kind of processed food or heavily, additive based food or whatever, because most other countries have found the things that we put in our food to be toxic and not allowed in their country. And, meanwhile, FDA's, they sort of make these calls. There's plenty of drugs in other countries that have been proven to be beneficial through scientific method that FDA just refuses to approve. I've always wondered why FDA is just so out there in those situations, and working with them, I can tell you, anyone who thinks it's a conspiracy has not worked with FDA, because one hand does not know what the other is doing with that organization. This assumption that there's anybody actually doing anything deliberately falls apart real quickly when you can clearly see that that is not the case.
Well, so what I'm hearing you say is useful drugs that could benefit people in society and alleviate pain are not permitted, in some cases at least, and poisons are permitted in our food.
That would not be available in other countries. Like if we tried to export it, they would be banned in other countries for containing things that those countries, scientists and kind of the world global view. It's actually always made me think, why doesn't the FDA just at least work with other scientific agencies around the world? If something's determined in one place to be bad, maybe it warrants retesting here, or at least a consideration that, this is science. Scientists are all sharing this information. FDA is making choices from a government and a bureaucratic standpoint.
So it might be more political than necessarily evidence-based.
Which is concerning, because when it comes to my food and my drugs, I would actually prefer if it was science-based and not political.
I think that is a good note to end on, because I fully support that conclusion, and I like when I support things. Thanks for listening. Join our mailing list at bit.ly/ BICUR, and get episodes and blogs conveniently emailed directly to you. Learn more about us at bicurian.com/podcast.
And if you like what we're doing, please tell your friends about us and share the episodes you find most interesting.
Thank you.